Thanks, everybody. I think, as you all know, over the past months, we've certainly been listening through the Board of Regents meetings in Hilo, and also a lot of outreach from the community. As I mentioned last week, the statements from the governor were pretty consistent with what we had been hearing. Last Tuesday, we promised that within a week we would be back with a little bit more detail. And so here we are a week later, and we've given you more detail. I think everybody has the statement, so rather than repeat it, I think Chancellor Straight and I would just be happy to answer any questions you have.
You've laid out some sort of a timetable. You do have a schedule for when you're going to have more information available. What's the more information you've got?
So today, what we're basically saying is, for each of the items in the governor's list, and frankly things we had been thinking about anyway, we've chunked them out as to how we're moving forward on each. So each one has a little bit of a life of its own. The TMT, making a legally binding agreement that the TMT site is the last site that we'll develop. We will be meeting with DLNR this week to try to understand how we would actually do that, because it's not 100% clear to us right now what that actually means. For the decommissioning, I think we said we'd have something in July. For the rules, we're hoping to get rules out in September. We're doing some listening, draft rules. So each of them has a little bit of a different pace to it.
The challenges of decommissioning, some of the stories delved into it a little bit last week. What's the biggest challenge? Is it the cost of taking one of those things down? What is it?
Well, the big challenge in decommissioning is that you have to unconstruct something that in some cases took 2 or 3 years to put together. So the physical taking down is the difficult part. Before we get to that, though, there's a series of consultation steps that we go through with Kahukumona, the Maunakea Management Board, DLNR, to be sure that what is planned is the appropriate set of steps to decommission the telescope in the appropriate way. It also requires that we describe before we start what it's going to look like at the end. And that has to be approved as well. We have to know how it's going to be restored to its natural state before we begin.
Chancellor, what are the costs of decommissioning? Can you give us any idea who's responsible and how much it costs?
We're breaking new ground, no pun intended, because we haven't decommissioned a telescope before. The announcement by Caltech Submillimeter Observatory last week that they would cease operation in September is the first opportunity we have to go through the process of decommissioning. We have some estimates of what it would cost, the realm of $2 to $5 million, depending on the size of the telescope and its location, those sorts of things. But the responsibility for paying for it is the observatories.
$2 to $5 million per telescope.
Per telescope, yes.
Is there an idea, besides the announcement that Caltech Submillimeter Observatory is going to end operations and be the first one to be decommissioned, do you know what other telescopes are possibly going to be in the mix for next to go?
So just a little backstory. The Caltech Submillimeter Observatory was ready to announce that it would be decommissioned, but they wanted the opportunity to discuss the matter with their employees first. And we have the same challenge. Before we announce a telescope is going to be decommissioned, we need an opportunity to talk that through with the people who work there and the people who invested in the project.
So I think the short answer is yes, we have some ideas, and no, we're not going to talk about it today. But we are discussing it with the observatory directors as a group.
David, any idea when the TMT work will commence again? No. Are you guys privy to that discussion, or is that something that they...
It's TMT's call.
One of the things that Governor Ige pointed out in his statement last week was that he would like to significantly limit and condition non-cultural access, and that the language that he uses is that it's far too much routine access to this special place. I noticed you didn't address that directly. Are you also in conversations on that, or what's your response?
So we've been talking with community groups quite a bit over the last 2 or 3 years about what the administrative rules would look like, and that includes rules relating to access. A bunch of ideas that have been kicked around, and it's what the governor has asked us to do is to move that to a formal decision-making process. So we'll begin another round of open house discussions on the nature of the rules here at the end of this month. And based on the public comment that we get, we'll draft some rules that'll come out for further comment. It's an iterative process before we might finally adopt them. The people in Hilo have asked a lot of questions over the last few days about what that means. Those are the types of questions that will need to be answered during the public comment phase before we finalize rules that would be used.
I think the key is this isn't something we can just casually kind of, you can go up, you can't go up, you look like a cultural practitioner, you look like a scientist, you look like a tourist. That's what the formal rulemaking process provides the guidelines and framework.
I don't know whether
for
the
that.
Maunakea Council will have rulemaking authority, but would you see these rules going back to that group for vetting at minimum?
Those will certainly go through our Maunakea Management Board and our Kahukumana. Normally, DLNR would not have to be involved in that rulemaking, I don't think.
Except
right?
at the very end.
Yeah, they would, at the very end, they get approved by the administration.
But it's also fair to say that it's issues like administrative rules for managing the Maunakea Science Reserve where we appreciate as much input as we can get to make sure that we craft something that works for everybody.
The return of lands that are not being used for astronomy, I think the governor said figure like 10,000 acres. What is the University of Hawaii?
We don't disagree with that assessment. We haven't drawn the maps yet, but that'll certainly be in our conversation with DLNR this week, as well as the mechanisms and means to do that. We don't know if that requires a formal proceeding or if we can simply amend our lease or exactly how that would work.
What types of university activities will be lost? I understand it's not used for astronomy.
We think none.
We aren't currently using those lands.
You are currently using.
We are not.
We're not.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Just
What about the cultural training aspect? Has there been any thought as to if that would also apply to astronomers who are using the telescope remotely and not necessarily at the summit?
Currently, the employees of the observatories go through a cultural training process. I think it's fair to say that that could be expanded. We're in the education business. There's always an opportunity to learn more, and we learn a lot about Mauna Kea every day. So I think expanding the programs for employees is important, but we don't have formal programs for visitors. And we will begin working on that this summer to scope out and determine what the nature of those programs should be.
How is the university sharing back with any protesters who may be there now or groups that you're affiliated with, your response to the governor's request?
We've actually been in several meetings kind of without much fanfare with the leaders of the protectors along with other conserved members of the Hawaiian community and the other stakeholders. They have been very respectful. They have been positive. I think we share a lot of common interests in protecting Mauna Kea and the stewardship of Mauna Kea. And we also have, areas of disagreement as well. But in general, that's our primary means of interacting.
Are there still protesters there now?
I
I haven't been up in the past few days. I would imagine there are.
Is there a concern on the university's end that when the governor mentioned that he wants to significantly reduce the term limit for that lease, the master lease, is there a concern that reducing it too much would, inhibit further investment in astronomy there?
Well, we had actually proposed that as one of the options in the initial form of the EIS that we were discussing. And so it's not an idea that's new to us. We will work out the details of that when we put out the renewed process for the EIS.
Is there anything in what the governor said last week that you guys disagree with?
Not really.
No.
Blanket?
We might have used different words, but fundamentally, we're aligned.
Any concern with TMT being the last site and decommissioning of telescopes that is sending maybe not the wrong message to scientists for this work?
Well, we had said that in the 2010 decommissioning plan, which is probably not the hottest seller in town. But we've been talking about that as an option for some time.
So those are things we had said, but for example, the last site, the key was really just he would like that to be more legally binding than a statement in the comprehensive management plan, and we're willing to do that, or we wouldn't have put it in the comprehensive management plan. Yeah.
In the plan, the way that it is now, this rough draft plan that you have, what is the most challenging aspect of it?
All the moving parts, I guess. Right. Yeah. I mean, I think these are all things that they're all the right things to do for the mountain. So clearly, just getting it all done in a timely manner and keeping on top of it will be the key.
There are a lot of steps. There are a lot of things that have to meet particular deadlines, and getting all of that moving is going to take coordination and effort.
Given that there are so many moving parts, do you plan to do anything like a dashboard or some public accountability website that will allow people to stay up to date on?
That's a great idea.
It's a great idea.
Yeah. We'll figure out a way to keep people informed. Thank you.
Okay, two more questions. Last two questions. Go ahead, John.
Of the plans or the actions that the governor has called for, are any of them plans that are completely starting over from scratch? I understand a lot of this is already in the works. There was already talk of doing this, like commissioning. Is there anything in there that's sort of...
I don't think we had really thought about turning over the land before the next lease, as an example, but we don't object to it.
Right. And one thing I'd say is that while we have talked about a number of things and what the governor requested, I take his message to be stop talking, start doing, and we're prepared to do that.
All right, last question.
Yeah, I'd like to ask, unless somebody else does, I'm sorry.
Did anybody else didn't get a chance? Christine? Sherry?
When you envisioned, the university envisioned this plan for the TMT to be built, did you guys ever envision it was going to have to go through all these hoops, have to go through various protesters, have to be dragged out this far? I mean, has it been a learning experience going forward for future UH projects going forward?
Well, the process has been 7 years long, and we knew from the beginning that we had to lay down some very specific plans about things like decommissioning and how the management of the mountain would improve. So this is a new chapter in that continuing process.
Okay, and let's
what has been the biggest learning experience for you?
For me, I would say, not that I didn't know this, but the importance of listening and to a lot of different voices and the challenges of, there isn't consensus in the community on this. I mean, there's clearly people who are opposed, there are clearly people supportive, and there are clearly a whole lot of people in the middle trying to figure out what to think.
All right, the last question.
I'd like to ask about the new scholarship programs, and that's way down on the list of things. The importance of that for the Native Hawaiian kids and those kind of things are strong.
We have existing scholarship programs and financial aid programs for Native Hawaiian students. And I think just as the governor is asking TMT and its partners to increase those, we feel we should as well. I think in particular where we could do better is in scholarships that'll help students, Native Hawaiian students in particular, get into graduate programs so that we can hire them back as faculty to complete the cycle.